Dinosaurs. They're undeniably amazing, and their many shapes and sizes can sometimes make modern animals seem kinda bland. But they are also undeniably weird, and many of the most famous dinosaurs had characteristics that are hard to imagine. Take Spinosaurus for example, who had a giant sail on its back that was taller than the average NBA player. Or look at Stegosaurus, with its thagomizer and plate-like structures that ran along its back. Clearly dinosaurs could be quite weird, but it's this weirdness itself that has given many of them their everlasting fame. However, because there are currently over 700 valid dinosaur species and counting, it can be quite hard to keep up with them all. So naturally, you probably aren't aware of some of the more obscure, terrible lizards. And this is a darn shame, since these obscure dinos are sometimes the strangest of the bunch. Take Linhaenicus, for example, a relatively unknown theropod who lived in China during the late Cretaceous. In overall appearance, it was quite generic, and like some other theropods, it too had rather odd and funny looking arms. Yet its situation was much more severe than anything seen elsewhere, and to date it remains the only dinosaur known to have had a single second digit. On top of this, of all known Alvarezsaurids, the family to which it belongs, the Linhaenicus holds the title of having the most reduced digit. This digit, or claw, was attached to a ridiculously tiny arm, essentially transforming the Linhaenicus into an animal who had teeny tiny cones for forelimbs. This puts the rest of the theropod group to shame, who are well known for sometimes having smaller arms, but not this small. So at this point, you should probably be feeling better for the T-Rex or Carnivorous, who are usually the main victims of arm jokes. The Linhaenicus's rather unique arms has obviously generated a lot of talk on what their purpose was. Originally, one of the main ideas was that they had no real use, and were basically vestigial. However, more recent research and cross-analysis of its closest relatives have revealed that their arms were actually likely their main tools. This is because, like many others within its family, the Linhaenicus was an insectivore, a thought further supported by its dentition, which consisted of small, needle-like teeth. And in order to round up these insects, it is believed to have used its arms as built-in diggers that could claw through ant and termite nests in a fashion similar to what is seen in modern-day anteaters. And it seems to have worked out well for the Linhaenicus, whose fossils span for 4 million years, specifically from 75 to 71 million years ago. But short hands wouldn't be the only extreme that dinosaurs would develop, or rather had developed, as nearly 90 million years before it, during the Middle Jurassic, there was a dinosaur prowling around that had the opposite problem: freakishly long hands. This was Epidexoteryx. Now, you're most likely familiar with the Therizinosaurs, a family of theropods who are famous for possessing extremely long claws. But Epidexoteryx was neither a Therizinosaur nor a dinosaur with long claws. Instead, it was the fingers themselves that were elongated, giving it somewhat the resemblance of this guy. Alas, this dinosaur wasn't an old internet meme, rather a Maniraptoran, meaning it was more closely related to birds than to ornithomimids. And its size was also closer to what is seen in birds and other non-avian dinosaurs, as like the Linhaenicus, it was very small. In fact, Epidexoteryx is among the smallest known dinosaurs, with fully grown adults being no bigger than a very small pigeon, which is quite a far cry from the norms, considering that the average dinosaur was equal in weight to a small African elephant. Given this small size and its relation to birds, you might be thinking that the long fingers had something to do with wings, since when you think about it, animals like pterosaurs and birds would have had strange-looking arms if they didn't actually turn into wings. Although, while some of its relatives did have wings, specimens of the Epidexoteryx actually seem to suggest that it didn't have wing feathers nor a wing membrane, meaning that the weird fingers were possibly on full display. But while it probably didn't have wings, it does seem that the fingers did have something to do with flight after all, or at least what comes a few steps before it, as paleontologists currently believe that the Epidexoteryx used its long fingers to grip vertical objects while climbing, leading to a highly arboreal lifestyle. This climbing adaptation would have let this Maniraptoran safely anchor itself without much effort, allowing it to feast on a variety of tree-based organisms such as small insects, worms, and larvae. Along with climbing, the fingers may have also been used to pry bark off, exposing the contents underneath. And to add on to this, its lifestyle in the trees was further aided by teeth that were quite weird in themselves, since they were located only in the front portion of the jaw, and were fairly straight and narrow, letting the Epidexoteryx pick at its prey with pinpoint precision. But the weirdness didn't end here, as on the end of its body it had a few long feathers, which were rather primitive in nature, resulting in their structure being ribbon-like of all things. Seeing this creature at night, or just unexpectedly, would have been quite the shock. Despite it not being a massive threat, but even it probably wasn't as weird as the next dinosaur, the Leoningosaurus. To put it bluntly, there is a chance that this dinosaur was a partially aquatic ankylosaur who hunted prey. That's a lot to break down, so perhaps it's best to start at the beginning, with its discovery. Like the Linhaenicus and Epidexoteryx, this odd dinosaur was found within China, and it is believed to have lived during the early Cretaceous. Since the holotype was first retrieved, over 20 specimens of this creature have been recovered, some of which have been found in pristine condition, which has allowed paleontologists to deduce that it was likely an ankylosaur, since it possessed dental and skeletal features only seen in other ankylosaurids. Though scientists were also quick to realize that a few things about this new genus were far from the norm, including the fact that a certain specimen had fish and lizard contents within its stomach. This completely perplexed everyone and led to further research which only revealed even more unusual findings, including fork-like denticles on the top of its teeth and rather sharp claws that made its founder more confident that it was at least to a degree carnivorous. And these paleontologists would also make the bold claim that not only did it have a taste for blood, but that it also had a knack for a watery lifestyle. This hypothesis stemmed from what could have been a bony plate that covered the underside of its body, thus offering protection from underneath attacks while swimming. Additionally, a lack of fusion between its hips and spines were further proposed to be a result of an aquatic lifestyle, as it would have allowed more flexible leg kicking. Of course though, such a claim has been met with a lot of skepticism, with the main counterpoints being that its so-called underplate didn't exist and that the lack of fusion wasn't an aquatic adaptation, but rather a byproduct of the specimens actually representing juveniles, since every skeleton was very small, being no more than 1.5 feet or half a meter long. Yet, those who do still think it might have been aquatic maintain that the 1-footers or half-meter specimens were adults, while the even smaller specimens that were shorter than a ruler were the babies. Regardless of its preferred habitat, this dinosaur was still quite odd, and still holds the distinction of being the first member of the Ankylosauria group to possess a tail club, while also being the oldest known member of the Ankylosaurid family. And hopefully as more remains are unearthed, we can finally figure out if this little dinosaur was a swimmer or not. Another relatively unknown and equally strange dinosaur that has nearly as much debate surrounding it is the Chilesaurus. This was a genus of herbivorous dinosaur that lived during the late Jurassic period and resided within what is today Chile. This quote-unquote nationality ultimately led to its name. However, a more suitable name might have been the Chimaerosaurus, because while it wasn't a combination of mammals and reptiles like the fictional Chimera usually is, it was a mashup of dinosaurs. Specifically, research on its remains revealed that it had traits that are classically associated with both theropods, sauropodomorphs, and ornithischians. A 3-for-1 combo, so to speak. Despite its seemingly mixed heritage, the Chilesaurus superficially resembled a theropod the most, which led to it originally having been placed within a basal position of the theropod group, the Tetanurae. Though its strange features could not be ignored, which included sauropodomorph-like limbs and an ornithischian-like hip, which was oddly similar to the hip of a Stegosaurus. This mix of features caused quite the confusion during its original discovery, and for a bit, paleontologists first thought they discovered 3 separate dinosaurs. Additionally, because the hip was extremely similar to what was seen in the Stegosaurs, some recent cladograms have suggested that this dinosaur wasn't a theropod at all, but rather some kind of strange ornithischian. And in regards to its similarities to sauropodomorphs, paleontologists currently think that convergent evolution is the answer, as its limbs appear to have been its main defense, with them being relatively strong for their size and equipped with an extendable large claw that could have slashed at would-be predators or competitors. But the strangeness does not stop here, as its teeth were quite odd too, being elongated, spatula-shaped, and pointing forwards, which is interesting because this dentition is really only seen in a select few dinosaurs and suggested a highly herbivorous lifestyle. And beyond its odd blend of dinosaurian traits, the Chilesaurus was a smaller dinosaur for those times, and measured only 3 meters or 10 feet from head to tail, while weighing around 200 pounds at its largest. This enigmatic creature has definitely confused a lot of people, but sometimes you can also be confused by simply outward appearances, which is best showcased by Yi Chi. Funnily enough, a relative of this theropod was already mentioned, the Epidexoteryx, and similar to its relative, it also had long hands. However, unlike the Epidexoteryx, Yi Chi's strange long hands seems to have supported a wing membrane. This, in addition to evidence that indicates heavy feathering, may give you a mental image of an animal that would have looked a lot like a bird. Yet Yi Chi looked like no bird you've ever seen, and its wings were unlike anything we know of, bearing more similarity to the wings of a certain flying mammal, bats. Specifically, a highly modified wrist bone and a peculiar membrane structure, both pointed to wings that were leathery and featherless, which along with its overall appearance made it look a bit like a certain fictional creature, leading to some nicknaming the Yi-Chi the dragon dinosaur. Though despite having a pair of wings, the Yi-Chi was no flyer, which is a result of it lacking attachment points for large enough muscles to support powered flight. Instead, its hard to miss wings were used to glide around, similar to how flying squirrels travel through the air. Like the Epidexoteryx and other members of its family, the Yi-Chi lived a life in the trees where it hunted insects among the vast forests of late Jurassic China, which at this point we can pretty much say was seemingly a place with a large amount of strange dinosaurs. The uniqueness of its wings definitely played a role in its initial success of occupying such a specific niche. Except, it also ended up being likely the culprit behind its swift downfall, as it coexisted with a large amount of competitors, namely pterosaurs and basal birds, who were in general much better at getting around, leaving the Yi-Chi in the dust, or rather trees, so to speak. Along with its wings, another interesting aspect of the Yi-Chi is that it's one of the few dinosaurs that we may know the color of, since an electron microscope found the presence of eumelanosomes, a melanosome that is brownish-black in nature. This color would have helped provide camouflage amongst trees, allowing for easier predation of prey and staying away from danger. Camouflage is surely nifty, but still, no amount of it could have hidden what made this next dinosaur, the Ankylosaur, weird, and that was its teeth. From the outside it was fairly normal, being your standard Oviraptorosaur, who inhabited, surprise surprise, China during the early Cretaceous. The teeth though, they were anything but normal, and have been likened to dentition found within rodents of all things, leading some to refer to this dinosaur as rat teeth. And similar to rats, it was the front teeth in particular that were abnormal, being flattened and buck-like. Its odd teeth structure confused paleontologists on what its diet could have been, a question further complicated by the debate surrounding Oviraptorosaurus diets in general, and in the beginning it was concluded that it had an omnivorous lifestyle. Eventually though, more detailed examinations of its teeth revealed dental wear patterns that shed more light on the true nature of its diet, showing that in reality, this rodent-like dinosaur was mainly a herbivore. And it gets a bit stranger, as analysis on its jaws showed that it wielded these teeth with crazy power, possibly biting down with the same force as a dinosaur 33 times its body size. And seeing that it weighed about 4.5 kilos or 10 pounds, this means that it likely bit with the same force as a dinosaur that would have been 333 pounds or 150 kilos. It is hypothesized that the strange shape of the teeth and their ridiculous power was the result of the Ankylosaurus possessing a very peculiar niche, which involved extremely tough vegetation. It's also possible that the immense power was used to occasionally scavenge meat. And with the Ankylosaurus, this list of strange and relatively obscure dinosaurs is pretty much wrapped up. But there is one more that I wanted to mention, the Eutyrannus. Unlike the others featured, this theropod is somewhat known, but definitely isn't well known to mainstream media, and it's still undeniably one of a kind, as it is the largest known dinosaur to have given us direct evidence of feathers. This discovery came not from one, but 3 separate specimens who together had the presence of feather imprints on their feet, pelvis, tail, neck, and arms, indicating that individuals were pretty well covered. This widespread distribution has made paleontologists think that the feathers served as means to regulate their body temperature, an idea backed by its environment, as the Eutyrannus inhabited the Yixian Formation during the early Cretaceous. And at that time, this area was associated with a climate comparable to the temperate forests seen in Western Canada, and was also susceptible to extreme seasonal changes that would have brought on considerable snowfall. It's because of this climate that some also speculate that its feathers would have been light in color. And within the large diversity of theropods, this feathered beast is thought to have belonged to the Proceratosauridae family. It was one of the largest members of its family, and the 3 recovered specimens indicate a max size of around 9 meters or 30 feet, with a weight of about 1.5 tons. For context, this size is quite comparable to the average Allosaurus, which would have allowed it to hunt down a wide range of dinosaurs that included ceratopsians, oviraptorosaurs, and maybe even sauropods. The idea that it hunted big game like sauropods comes from the location of the recovered specimens, as all 3 known skeletons were found in the exact same location, suggesting that this carnivore likely hunted in packs, another unusual feature amongst theropods. And newsflash, it lived in China too. So basically, if you want to see strange wacky dinosaurs, go to Mesozoic China,